in this episode of the Critical Oxygen Podcast.
I would try to make one of those sessions 2 hours and then have 2 1-hour sessions. The 1-hour sessions could give you one VO2 max session, one threshold session with a good 20 to 30 minute warm up. And then you could use that back half with a 5 to 10 minute cool down for anything that's going to work.
Welcome to the Critical Oxygen Podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your endurance potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson. I have a PhD in molecular exercise physiology, and I'm the founder of Critical Oxygen, where my mission is to build better endurance athletes through remote education and in-person physiological testing. Today, I'm joined by continuing guest host, Coach Aaron Geiser, where we complete part 2 of our Q&A we started in a previous episode. In this question and answer episode, we touch on when strength training should be completed for endurance athletes, how to adjust your training zones if you're doing different sports like cycling and running, because these zones are going to occur at different intensities. We also touch on how to choose a reputable laboratory for physiological testing and what to ask and what to look for when scouting different testing businesses. Finally, we touch on how to develop your FTP with only 4 hours of training per week and the differences between Zone 2 training and double threshold days. We're always happy to answer more of your questions, so please reach out with what you want to know about training and endurance physiology. And without further ado, please enjoy this Q&A episode with Coach Aaron Geiser. All right, Aaron Geiser, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully, as we continue down this path, you and I have worked on trying to get a little bit better vocal aesthetics on my end. So hopefully we're meeting those expectations as we go forward.
Yeah, I think it's all about incremental improvements. And I think, I hope people appreciate the new, introduction and the way that I have like the beginning of the podcast set up. I try to give a little bit more context to what is going to occur during the episode. So you can kind of get, a little bit of a teaser from that perspective. If you guys have any feedback on the new, music, the new introduction, the new way that the intro is set up, please let me know. I'm always trying to make this podcast better. And like Aaron said, he's working on getting the audio side of things up and running a little bit better too. If the plan is that we start to get some either fan support or some sponsors, so then we can actually start to upgrade our our processes and our audio equipment as well. So if anything, everything's just going to keep moving incrementally up, and we appreciate you guys listening. So it's a big thanks to everybody for bearing with us. So Aaron, today,
has it been that challenging up to this
no.
point?
No, I think overall, actually, one of the things that I really wanted to aim for on this podcast was good audio, because I obviously, podcast being an audio medium, I think it's important. So it's not a bearing with us, but thank you for working with us.
Support.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, thank you for So today, Aaron and I are going to continue our question and answers from the I think the last episode him and I did together. There's some fun questions that we had that were submitted to me via Instagram, and we just didn't have time to get all of those done. So Aaron, if you don't mind, we're just going to dive right in. I think we're going to start off with strength training. So the first thing I am interested in is, how do you implement strength training for your Ironman, half Ironman athletes? And how do you prioritize, or do you prioritize that over other things? What's your approach on strength training?
Well, for me personally, it's not gonna be one answer that's gonna fit all parts of this question. So an individual that maybe consistently gets injured on running is probably going to get more strength training than one that's not. If an athlete only has a finite amount of time to train during the course of the week, I have to take and place what priority, what are we going to get more bang for our buck on, what is going to move the needle for that particular athlete and another one. I have to get into that moment, get into that athlete's ability, and prescribe what I feel is going to take them to their goals.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's going to speak back to what the athlete has as their primary source of goals is going to be super, super important of what I'm going to be prescribing in that case as well.
Mm-hmm.
So also age is going to be a factor. I mean, there's so many different things that will pivot on that question of, is it important? Does it become more important than swim, bike, and run? Does it become less important than this, that, and the other? What I often recommend, depending on when an athlete comes in with me, if they come in at a time where they are already kind of past that general base and we're starting to sharpen up for race specific and like competition style efforts.
Mm-hmm.
If they have not had strength training in their routine before, I typically do not insert it at that point, because there's going to be a certain level of stress, certain level of soreness that's going to be present in those blocks, that's just going to be from the work that we need to get you to race day.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody's coming in at the beginning of that general base, I routinely start it from that day one point and allow it to move through the course, pull it back to maybe 2 days. It would start as strength sessions. Then as we get about 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, I pull it back to one. When we get to the taper, I pull it out completely. So some athletes and older, should say more experienced athletes in age, often like to keep it in there during their taper. So then I would leave that there and then maybe decrease the intensity along with one of the volume sessions and have that as their strength training session for that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
So I really feel like it's going to depend upon when that person starts, where that person is within the build process, when their events are, what kind of breakdowns have they been subject to or exposed to in the last 3 weeks, the last 6 months, and make decisions based off of that. Now, there is just the general rule of thought: as we age, it's more important to implement some strength training, just because we do start to lose muscle mass as we age. So along with strength training, increasing protein in that case. But as far as the general question to every athlete, and that's just too broad for me to say, yes, this is what I would do, this is how I would do it, and this is the end result.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you have, say, for example, proper warm-up protocols, proper cool-down protocols, and other things like that, strength training doesn't have to just look like a separate day where you go to the gym and lift weights. Especially if you're more of a time-crunched athlete who's trying to balance swim, bike, and run, right, like a triathlete, and you're trying to balance a lot of volume, it could look like, doing dynamic warm-up before your runs with some balance, jumping, maybe a little bit of accelerations in terms of running faster, maybe some lunges, other things like that. Especially at the end of a workout as well, you can do body weight stuff, and for the most part, if you can do enough reps of body weight, you can definitely help keep yourself strong. But it comes down to it's like you have to say, okay, well, what is my priority? Especially like what you were saying is, if somebody comes to you and they haven't lifted weights and they're going into the specific phase of things, then you're not going to introduce strength training, because in an ideal world, you would probably have someone doing, multi-joint lifts that are fairly heavy, or plyometrics, or, explosive type movements, which are shown to be like the best for improving running economy and, injury prevention. But you're not going to add that if somebody is naive to it, especially when they're coming up on their specific side of getting into the race, or a race, and going from there. So it's again, it is context specific. One thing I will ask, though, because this was a good question, and this is something that does get debated a lot, is why is it better to strength train after your endurance work if you are an endurance athlete?
I don't know if generalizing better is the right way to put it too. I depending on what the session is coming from, there is some importance to being fresh for a critical workout, whether it be run, bike, or swim. And if we fatigue, that's going to then cause form breakdowns or other potential options there, or opportunities, I should say. That's when strength training before becomes complicated. But if, let's say that you're lifting in the morning and then you're coming back in the PM with a sufficient recovery, it's not much different than if you did it at the end of the day and had a critical session in the morning the following day.
Yeah.
So I am more likely to put a strength session in the AM of a even critical bike workout in the PM, and I look at it as a combo effect of getting the strength also with maybe a threshold or VO2 max style bike. Yes, week 1, week 2, there's probably a little more fatigue exposed in those week 1, week 2 bikes. But I notice a significant difference week 3, week 4, week 5 if I continue on that protocol.
Yeah.
Of the output within that bike. And then when I transition to something else, it shows it in that next block. So I don't necessarily think that it's just generally blanketing that it's got to be done. The things that I would look at is what is the risk and potential step back of putting that strength workout before the session that you have after that strength session.
Yep.
If you have constant breakdowns in the run and you're going to go lift heavy, you're more likely to increase your exposure to poor run form and increased injury if you do a strength session before your run. If you don't, and if you are pretty efficient, I think that that's a person that can continue to put strength training before that session, and they're going to get even greater advancements and bang for their buck because they're doing that session in a little bit more fatigue, which is ultimately going to end up building endurance down the road. And I just think that there's a couple of different ways to look at that and answer that question. But Phil, I don't think it's as simple as just saying this or that. I do think that there's some things that you can analyze and make that quality decision of, yeah, maybe it is better for that individual to be lifting before that session, when another person you're going to say, let's go ahead and put this, let's get the freshness on, like the key workout from swim, bike, and run on fresh body, and then put that strength training workout on a little bit of fatigue.
Yeah. I guess I was referring that question specifically where my mind goes is within session. So if you're doing strength and endurance in one session, I generally have people put their endurance first, especially if they're a triathlete or if that's their primary goal, and then put their strength session afterwards. And the reason for that is that, at least from what I've seen, your body is going to make the adaptations to, or have a higher propensity to make adaptations to the thing that you prioritize and do first. So if you do your endurance work first and that is your priority, then then those adaptations are going to be more prioritized rather than the strength training, which happens second, which then is going to kind of facilitate the endurance rather than make you stronger or bigger or whatever it is. And I understand there's caveats with that too, because it depends on how long are you going, how intense is your exercise, because that's what's going to then cause the, one adaptation to dominate or be higher than another. But that's where my mind initially goes, is like, if someone was to go and do a session where it's like they only have one time of day to work out, should they do their endurance stuff first or their strength training first? And typically I lean towards the endurance first. But again, as you made a good argument there, I think that there could be cases where the strength training could go first, and then you could get into your endurance work as well.
But in that case, also, there's a way that we could implement both. So we could do aerobic hill work from a run standpoint. We could also, for an athlete that is still trying to build the aerobic system, we could go weighted vest on a Stairmaster or inclined walk, where we're still staying aerobic, but we're also getting the strength from the additional weight on the body from that vest. From the bike perspective, we could do heavy gear work while still maintaining control of the heart rate there. And from a swim perspective, we could throw in paddles and work paddle pull buoy, as far as just trying to create some additional strength within the catch portion of the swim. So I also think that there's a simplistic way from put it before, put it during, and put it after, and you can always utilize that as kind of the tools that you pull from your toolbox based on the amount of time that you have, based on what you're trying to accomplish. And the thing that every single one of my athletes gets exposed to heavy gear work. The research on heavy gear work on the bike has shown to improve speeds uphill and climbing, and also improve speeds on flats. So there's also benefits of doing the workout from an endurance perspective on strength or different stresses that will end up targeting the muscular and neuromuscular system, that's going to end up providing you with serious gains that are going to translate to ultimately what you're coming back to as a triathlete, as a runner, as a cyclist, or as just a swimmer.
Yeah, and I will say too that your body stands to gain the most from what you've done the least. So if you've never done heavy gear work, then your body is probably going to respond very well. Or I can't say it's going to respond very well, but it has the highest potential to improve if you've never done something before. That's not to say though that, like, I also want to make it clear that, heavy gear work, if you're trying to get strong, like literally like strengthen your legs, the best way to strengthen your legs is going to be doing, heavy or like weightlifting, for example. But again, as Aaron was saying, it's all different tools in your toolbox. So you have to use them, and you have to use them based off of what the goal of the session is, what the goal of your racing season is, what the goal of, just your wellness and your other goals are. So I like that you added that in there, because that is something that whenever I hear strength training, I don't immediately go to like, oh, well, I could wear a weight vest, I could run uphill, I could, pull with paddles on my hands during swimming, I could do heavy gear work, because just for some reason, my brain just doesn't make that connection. I always go directly to, weightlifting, just because that's been more of my background. So,
well, and I think that that's not uncommon. I think people don't recognize that these forms of training provide just that same response that you're going to get. It's, of course, there's going to be a little bit of a difference than doing squats than doing heavy gear work, but you're going to get some of the benefits from that. And again, at the end of the day, every athlete has an amount of time that they have to work, and there's an amount of time that the body can actually handle loads. What are we doing to support that part of it as well, and not taking that person or that individual's muscles or body or mind past a point where they can't get the returns that they're set out to try to get in whatever activity they do.
Yeah. So do you ever get concerned that, like, if you're always doing too much specific work, so if you're always just swimming, biking, and running, that those individuals that are at a higher risk of injury just because of the repeat loads? Or um, do you find that doing the three sports generally gives enough of differences in movements and muscle engagement that like, people are not going to be at as high of a risk as opposed to, somebody who is just a runner, for example?
Well, I mean, one thing that you can 100% argue with all three sports, they all take place in the sagittal plane. So they
Yeah.
all take place going forward. I mean that by neglecting the frontal plane and moving side to side, you're going to prevent, and you probably see it in a lot of runners. I see it in runners, cyclists, and glutes are not very strong, and it's because they go in that single direction. So I'm not saying that it's not, you have to get some of that additional plane. So you want to hit the transverse plane, you want to hit the frontal plane, you want to hit the sagittal plane. The thing is, you're getting too much exposure to one plane from triathlon or just running or just cycling, that it is important to throw in even just mobility work that is taking place in those other planes of movement, because it's going to start to operate and work muscle groups that do keep you in alignment for that sagittal plane movement,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not getting as strengthened or as utilized within what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So it's just more like the sister muscles of everything that keep everything running properly in that forward move. So I don't want to say, some people are just physically robust enough that they're not going to break down. It's just, it's something that is about either their DNA, the way that they've been grown, what they do. Some people just don't break down, and others are going to be subject to breaking down, and breaking down at very, very minimal cost. So it's, again, recognizing what your weaknesses are, where you maybe have issues, listening to where you feel those weaknesses and saying, okay, either I need to answer this question or I need to get somebody else involved to answer this question for me.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get stronger in these areas because I feel it or I see a weakness? But I don't think it's as simple as just saying, yeah, if you don't do strength training, Phil, you're going to break down. Because I've seen professional triathletes, one that was on the Indoor IQ group that did not do really any strength work, and they won multiple Ironman. So it's not something that I feel has to be, but some people, based on just their physiology, based on their muscle structure, based on their skeletal system, they're just going to have it in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's good. And as always, it's kind of content is always context specific, right? And that's the point of having a good coach, or knowing yourself, or asking those questions and becoming more self-aware, is that you get an idea of, for example, for myself, I have a tendency when I do a lot of road running to get Achilles injuries, soft tissue injuries, other things like that. So I really need to back off in terms of my road running, but I need to focus on doing things that are going to strengthen my ability to adapt to the road running. So I do a lot of trail running, because that actually does kind of get a little bit more of like the side-to-side movements and the strength kind of engaged, and that helps me be a little bit more robust on the road. I'm also doing a lot of like mobility work, rotational work, strength work for that sort of stuff. So that's just one example of, like I had buddies in high school who they would never stretch, never strength train, and they would run, 80, 90 miles a week, and, are running 4-minute miles. And you're like, holy crap, dude. Like, and then I'm like, I think about running, 80 miles a week, and I don't even get to that point, and my foot starts to hurt. So It is about knowing that, and it's also okay, right? If you are somebody who has a tendency to break down on the run, there's other options of continuing to develop your aerobic system as well. Like you don't always have to strive to be the person who's like, oh, I run 80 to 90 miles a week, or I do this sort of stuff. Like, you can supplement and get a long way or very close, or you can develop your aerobic performance during running by doing 3 days a week of running, and then supplementing that with other things uh, like walking or cycling or swimming. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't really appreciate, is that you can still get quite a long way there in terms of your aerobic development without doing your specific sport all the time. Because if it's always causing a breakdown, then obviously something is happening where you're putting on too much stress.
Well, and I think that is a phenomenal point that you make there. And so many people that are driven to these sports are type A personalities. They want to check all the boxes green.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality to that is sometimes those boxes need to be red. Sometimes they need to be yellow. Sometimes they need to be orange. So it doesn't have to be green, and it doesn't always have to be go, go, go.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you're being guided by a coach, the coach should be able to do this very, very effectively and efficiently. But if you're not, if you are doing this on your own, where you're going to get the most bang for your buck is recognizing yourself, understanding your limitations, and then building a plan that's specific to you,
Mm-hmm.
rather than specific to somebody that you read about in a magazine or see a YouTube video.
Or their Strava.
Right. It's not, I mean, the reality is, one, you don't know where they're getting the coaching. You don't
Mm-hmm.
know who's making the decisions for them. And I mean, maybe the person that's making the decisions for that person's drunk at the wheel too, so you don't want to follow them for that. But it's just, you are specific to yourself. If you have certain breakdowns, you need to approach those breakdowns and build the strength to prevent that from being a breakdown. But
Mm-hmm.
if you don't and you avoid that, you're going to continue to run into that brick wall, and you continue to have the same issues. So take a step back, recognize what's preventing you and what's causing you that challenge,
Mm-hmm.
and start to put a plan around that. That's what's going to be the better long-term goal, and it's going to give you more long-term growth
Mm-hmm.
and health.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be more important.
Yeah. And, you don't want to be the type of person too who, you get to your 50s, 60s, and all of a sudden you need a hip replacement, a knee replacement, other things like that. And then you can never actually do, what you love doing, which is probably endurance sport if you're listening to this podcast. So for example, something that I've really started to realize is I've had a hip and a lower back issue for a really, really long time. And something that I kept trying to do was I kept trying to increase my intensity in my exercise, because I'd start to get better. Okay, I'm going to increase my intensity now. And then my lower back would just hurt for, 2-3 weeks at a time. My hip would always be sore, other things like that. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to take a step back, address the mobility and the strength issues that are potentially causing or exacerbating the hip and the back issues. And I told myself, it's actually my back and my hip are actually feeling really good right now. And it's been like 2 weeks, from doing this. But right now I'm doing walking, and I'm doing like easy zone 2 work and on the bike. And those are the two things that I'm doing in terms of aerobic development. All the other stuff are basic strengthening, mobility sort of stuff, and some other things that I'm trying out. And sometimes it takes that step back to patch the holes in a sinking ship, so that those holes don't get to the point where your whole ship is just going down, and you can't actually do what you want to do. So it's been a little bit of a kind of an ego check for me, because I'm like, oh man, all my numbers are super low. And this is like pretty boring because I'm just doing mobility over and over and over again. But I know that if I stick to it, and I'm giving myself, I'm saying 6 weeks of doing this, because I think that is, and then I'll check in. I think that's what's going to kind of give me at least first the ability to re-strengthen things and then get the mobility necessary. And then I'm going to very, very cautiously start to add in a little bit more of that intensity over time, or, introducing things that are a little bit more potentially fatigue inducing. So
I was gonna say, I was wondering why you weren't pointing out that it was that performance and science gait analysis that really got you to this point, but I guess not.
well, no, it's been a number of different things, right? The, like, for real, like the gait analysis did kind of open my eyes to the fact that, so for those of you that don't know, Aaron also runs a gait analysis, or what, it's not, you don't run the company, but you're an investor or an owner.
I'm the founder or
Okay.
the co-founder of Performance and Science, and we do some bike fitting, we do gait analysis,
Yeah.
and then there are some coaches under that group that work for the company.
Yeah. So when I was with Aaron doing the testing and stuff for his athletes, he was nice enough to allow me to do a gait analysis, and something that he noticed immediately, he whispered to somebody, he was like, yeah, Phil runs like he's like, going into battle like he's in Sparta or something like that. And I was like, ha, that means I'm jacked and I can carry a spear and fight things. But no, what he meant by that was that I was super stiff in my upper body. And then basically from the gait analysis, what we found is that my hips were pretty stiff, and then what was happening is my knees kind of cave in. So from there, what they're able to do is they're able to give strength exercises and other things like that. And then I was also talking to another coach who was on this podcast, Michelle Simmons, who had some ideas about thoracic mobility and hip mobility and other things like that. So I'm taking some of the stuff that she taught me, and I'm kind of implementing both the mobility and the movement side of things, as well as the strengthening side of things and the things that I learned from Aaron's company. And I'm trying to put both of those together because it kind of, if anyone has had repeated injuries, it does become like banging your head against the wall. And it's so frustrating because you're like, man, I feel like I'm doing everything right, but maybe you're not addressing the problem at the root of it. And until you address the problem at the root of it, you're just going to keep banging your head against the wall, which is not fun. So I encourage people, sometimes it does just take a step back and take some self-awareness to be able to try to find those issues and then fix them.
Absolutely.
So that kind of brings us, it's like for individuals like myself who are training for running and training for biking. One thing that you will notice if you have never actually gone from, say, running to biking or biking to running, is that your heart rates and your perceived levels of exertion for the same heart rate, like on the bike and on the run, could be totally different. So the next question is, why are those zones and thresholds so different for running and cycling? And then how do we actually deal with that?
So, one, we all operate under this thing called gravity. And gravity, every time that we land when we're running, there are forces that need to be distributed across the body and what you're landing on. Because every time that you take a step, you're landing on your foot. That foot then takes the blunt of that and it kind of runs up the chain of the body. So with this, running is just more a stressful activity because you not only are carrying your own full body weight, which bike is carrying part of your body weight, you are moving your entire body weight based on what you're, like that movement that you're doing. So there's more exertion there. And again, you're just having to compete against the body doing more in the running sense than it does when it's sitting on top of a bike frame. So this is one of the biggest factors of why typically those thresholds or those efforts are completely different between one skill set and another skill set.
Mm-hmm.
I've only seen this in a couple of individuals where they grew up running and their running thresholds were actually lower than their cycling thresholds because they were completely, never exposed to a bike, and
Right.
biking was super stressful for them. Just being kind of keeping the bike upright, riding in traffic, doing all the things that it takes to ride a bike was just more stressful. So their actual heart rate and everything else was just a little bit higher. But for the most part, most of us are dealing with the exact opposite, where the bike is, the heart rates are just a little bit lower to the ratings of perceived exertion, heart rate, effort, pace, all those things are just slightly lower than it is on the run. And it's because of those, pretty much the forces that we are putting on the body in a run form, it's just greater than it is on the bike.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's necessarily the right verbiage of how do we deal with that. We make adjustments based on that knowledge. And if you're one of those individuals that falls into this classification, which is most everybody, it's just adjusting what is still your max heart rate on the bike compared to on the run. Probably is going to be slightly lower on the bike than it is on the run.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are doing just general development of that individual's zones, they're naturally just going to be a little bit lower on the bike than they are on the run. So coming to grips with that and recognizing that, oh, when I run, my heart rate is in zone 2 at 150 beats per minute, doesn't mean you need to go out and pound yourself on the bike at 150 beats per minute, because that might not necessarily translate the same way. And
Right.
the ratings of perceived exertion could be that 150 beats per minute on the bike gives you an RPE of 8 or 9, where on the run it might be a 6 or a 7.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to kind of adapt and adjust to where those RPE feels are for those particular heart rates, and also build the zones based on what your actual threshold capabilities are for both of those activities.
Mm-hmm.
And what you also might find out is, if you've been on a bike more, you might be able to handle a higher threshold for longer periods of time, because you just know how to suffer more than you do on a bike too. So I mean, there's a couple of different things that are going to play into this, but the main thing is adjusting your zones to meet what the need and what the physiological adaptation for that exercise is supposed to be, and stick to it.
Yeah.
And often athletes just get into that gray zone, spend so many hours in that gray zone, and man, Phil, I'm not getting any better. What's going on here? It's typically a simple answer when you hear that response.
Yeah. You're like, okay, well, you're always exercising harder than, or no, you're never exercising to what adaptation we're actually trying to get. When you're doing your easy runs or your easy workouts, you're exercising too hard. When you're doing your hard workouts, you're exercising too easy, and then you never get any juxtaposition of intensity. Right? It's always just the same all the way across. I will say though that this is actually a perfect intro or need for physiological testing. Is if you want to determine those differences, like the optimal way to go about that would be to do some form of physiological testing. But as Aaron and I talked on the last episode about, you could also do field tests of, kind of like shorter, say like 5-minute efforts, longer, 30 to 60-minute efforts to really, really long efforts. And then you can kind of get an idea of where those different zones would be based off of those efforts and what your internal variables like your heart rate are actually telling you. So you could go like the fancy lab physiology route, which is what I would recommend, because that's just going to give you, like the most individualization. Or you could do the field testing route as well, which is going to get you pretty close.
And my only piece that I'm going to add to that is, taking into account of if you're going to do laboratory testing, which I 100% agree with you, Phil, but just make sure that you're getting a reputable place that's going to be able to provide you with the information and data that you can. I mean, through Endure IQ, I've looked at a lot of tests that have come from US based and throughout the world. And it's always a tough discussion with the athlete to review that analysis and say, the test parameters were not very good here. I hate to tell you that whatever you spent, you're not getting anything that's really digestible and like we can't use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I know. And that's something that I've been thinking about lately too, is how could you as an athlete like tell, right? Is like, if you've never done physiology testing before, how do you know, like, what are the warning signs when you walk in? And honestly, I don't know, because I've been taught by some of the best exercise physiologists in the world on how to do physiology testing. But I think I think maybe if there's an individual and you ask, I would always ask for credentials. Like, what is your training in this? How many tests have you done? What types of athletes have you worked with? Because that's going to tell you quite a bit about who the individual is. If it's somebody who's just like, oh yeah, I have a bachelor's degree and I'm just kind of a tech running the show, I wouldn't pay for that. I would much rather have somebody with PhD training or at least a master's degree. And then if somebody isn't individualizing your testing protocol, that's another big red flag for me as well. If you go in and they're like, oh yeah, this is if it seems like a cookie cutter plan, and you say, hey, and they don't ask you anything about like, what's your training background, what do you think your FTP is, other things like that, that's another warning sign that they're not thinking about how to change the testing protocol based on you as the athlete who's coming to them. Everybody does the same test, because admittedly I use the same test for everybody, but I have a good justification for it. And it's, so as an athlete, be proactive and be an advocate for yourself when you're going into those situations. Because, there's nothing more frustrating than doing what we think is a really cool exercise physiology test, taking it to our coach, like Aaron, and being like, hey man, like, what can we learn from this? And he's like, well, nothing, because it seems like this test wasn't even, done, in the proper parameters.
And I feel like this is the perfect place for people to at least ask the question in chats on Critical O2 is, hey Phil, what should I be looking for in this test? Or what should I, because often if we tell you, hey, this is a good or this is a good test to have, but we don't tell you exactly what, or if we don't have the explanation from you of what we're trying to move towards, you want to at least ask the question to know how and what style of lab testing is going to be the best for you. And let's say that you're looking at substrate utilization, which is how you burn calories at particular outputs, heart rates, zones, whatever. If we aren't in zones for a long enough period of time to get you steady state, then you're not going to get data. So right. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, don't be afraid to ask the questions to us on Critical O2 of, hey, this is my goal. What would be the best test for me to get? Because we recognize probably a lot of you out there listening have heard lab testing, but you're probably asking, well, how would lab testing look for me? What do I want to get to know? Why is it important to me? Often we can get you like zone levels, but we can also get you so much more. If we are doing a metabolic test, we can start to see where your respiratory exchange ratio is at certain heart rates or power outputs. From that, we can then start to digest and diagnose, okay, well, at this particular power level, you are this percent fat, you are this percent carbohydrate. We can start to then develop a fueling process for you
Mhm.
as well. We can also take that same number and say, okay, when we're in the training environment, we want to stay below this point because this is going to drive your fat oxidation.
Mhm.
Now, when we're looking at a threshold or a VO2 max workout, we're going to throw that out the window and we're going to look at this particular group of information. So, from that, get that direction, know what you want to test, and then spot on ask those individuals that you're looking to potentially use as
Mhm.
your laboratory and get specific. What
Yep.
is your protocol? How do you ramp up watts? What piece of equipment am I being tested on? What's your metabolic cart? How are you, if you're doing gas exchange, how are you capturing that gas?
Mhm.
So a lot of these things are just a quality test administrator is going to be able to answer these questions. They're going to be able to fill in the blanks for you
Yeah.
and provide you with the confidence of, okay, this person is going to guide me in the right direction.
Yep.
If they can't answer some of those basic questions, move on to the next. And if they can't start to answer some of those secondary questions, is there somebody else that I might be able to talk to and get this
Yeah.
test done? Because before COVID, the reality was you could walk on a campus and get tested on a university campus. Sadly, since COVID, that's kind of decreased in that opportunity, and it's gone to more of individuals that have set up a laboratory.
Yeah.
And those individuals are only as good as their education and only as good as their exposure of taking tests. So I would just reiterate to our listeners that if you make a phone call to these places and they can't answer these questions, don't drop your money down, because you're most likely going to walk away with information that's not going to get you to the answers that you're looking for.
Mhm. Yeah, and if you guys do have questions, because you have to know what questions to ask, right, in order to kind of sift through. So if you don't know what questions to ask, reach out to me on Critical O2. Reach out to Aaron if you at Try Geyser, and he'll either point you towards me or he'll be able to answer the question, because he's done a lot of physiological testing with his athletes as well. So and we'd be more than happy to just be like, okay, well, what's your goal? What are you looking for? Okay, here's probably what my protocol would be. You can ask them this, this, and this, and then kind of get a good direction. Because
And if I can add something to that,
absolutely.
if you are a listener and you've had a good experience with a laboratory in your area, I would love for you to put that in the post as well, because
Yeah.
one, good laboratories are hard to find, and we are more than happy to point other individuals out there to go to that location, because getting good information is the ultimate resource that we're looking to try to provide.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, that is the gold standard in terms of determining zones, determining substrate utilization, determining VO2 max and other physiological parameters. And by doing that, it's mobile, like I said, so I can come drive down to you. I even took it all the way to Kentucky to test Aaron and his athletes. Well, I didn't test Aaron. I would love to do that at some point.
I was a little disappointed that I didn't get on the schedule, but
Dude,
it's
I
all
know.
good. We had other fish to fry while you were here.
Well, next time, because we'll be doing it regularly, we'll get you in there, whether it's early in the morning or late at night, or just anytime we can fit it in.
It's probably good that we didn't do it in front of athletes as well. I didn't want to make anybody feel bad or give them more fuel that they could give me crap. So it worked out fine.
Yeah, and that might not be something that it's like, well, we can keep that under wraps if you're actually
Well, and also, I mean, we had one athlete that was trying on the ramp test, or the stages test, was trying to just get to the point that I got to. Get to the point that I got to. Sometimes that's not the ideal scenario.
No.
Sometimes it's good motivation. Sometimes it can make you really fall on your face.
Yeah, and Aaron and I will go into more depth about like the testing protocols that we followed, why he was interested in doing those sort of things in a subsequent episode. Because I do think that is something that I am trying to push forward for my business, is that mobile physiology testing for groups of interested athletes and other things like that. So stay tuned for another episode on that. But until we get to that in upcoming episodes, I just want to kind of go over, there's like a couple more questions that are just kind of fun. And, maybe kind of touch on a little bit more of like training philosophies and other things like that. So the first one is, how can you improve FTP with only 4 hours of training per week?
Because I don't mean that in a mean. I would assume that the athlete that's only able to train 4 hours a week, I mean, maybe they're going to have maybe they're going to have a huge FTP. Maybe they're going to have a big VO2 max, but the likelihood is that they're not.
Mm-hmm.
So, one, we still want to work the aerobic aspect of things. So, what I would more or less do in this
I would say this person is
straight bike or straight run.
We'll just say straight biking. This person most likely, has a little bit of experience with training, but not somebody who has been training for years and years and years. Yeah, and has 4 hours. So it's like 4 hours available per week. So are we dividing that up, to 30 minutes a day, or 2 hours twice a week, or 1 hour 4 days a week? Mixture of the two.
30 minutes. I'll be just completely honest. A couple of sessions at 30 minutes is going to be hard to move the needle one way or another. Yeah, I don't think the stimulus for any response is just not great enough unless you do a 10-minute warm up and go straight into some VO2 max. But it's not going to be a very good response for a threshold. It's not going to be a very good spot for kind of tempo work, and it's not going to be it's definitely not going to be a response from aerobic development.
Yep.
I would try to condense them to 3 if possible. So that means we almost have like a 2-hour ride and then 2 1-hour rides, if that's possible. If not, the next thing I would try to shoot for is a couple of 75-minuters. And so maybe 3 75-minuters and then fit in the other time result from there. Because I guess that would be 45 minutes. 45 minutes session, I would 100% just make that a VO2 max short session. So you're hitting 30 30s, 30 15s, 40 20s in that case.
Yeah, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, also super effective. Yeah. Especially especially if you're like a naive athlete, like really, like, it's like whatever style of VO2 max workouts you're doing is going to be beneficial, right? It's so you the good thing about being a beginner is you can kind of pick and choose. Obviously, you don't want to overdo it, but like you don't have to be super dialed in to like, oh, I can only do 30 30s or I can only do 5x5s, right?
And I will say two different measurements there too. If we're talking about somebody that's experienced, you need to wipe your brain clean of your previous bests. You need, if you were not training 4 hours and you had this massive VO2 or FTP or even solid FTP, and you're coming back and you're doing half that amount of training or a third of amount of that training, you just got to wipe your slate clean. You can't think about, well, back in the day I did this, because It's not the same. You're not comparing apples to apples. You need to start from square one. But from where you're at, if you want to get better, I really do think aerobic is going to move that needle for that inexperienced and experienced athlete from where they are. Because there's probably a reason even an experienced individual is coming back to 4 hours per week. But I would try to make one of those sessions 2 hours and then have 2 1-hour sessions. The 1-hour sessions could give you 1 VO2 max session, 1 threshold session with a good 20 to 30 minute warm up. And then you could use that back half with a 5 to 10 minute cool down for anything that's going to work. So your thresholds are going to be roughly at your current FTP. you're going to be holding them from 3 to 5 to even 6 and 8 minutes if you can. Based on where you're at that progression, you want to start roughly in the lower end and then build that up to that higher end. Your VO2 max are going to be a little bit more above your current threshold. So you could be anywhere from 104 to 121% from that. I mean, and it could go above 121%. So let's just say above 104% in that case. Your threshold is going to kind of be from 99 to 103% of your normal FTP. Give your exposure there. I would not initially start to move into some tempo or longer sweet spot efforts right off the get-go. So I would use that 2 hour predominantly for straight aerobic work. And then the more that you recognize that you are getting benefit from that style of training, then what I would end up doing is moving one of those threshold or VO2 max workouts and start to transition that into exposure of 8 minutes at threshold, 2 minutes, or not threshold, but of tempo, 2 minutes down, and then extend it to 10 minutes or so on. But actually, no. Since I'm put on the fly, I'm thinking about this, and I would just not do tempo. I would remove tempo and sweet spot and just extend out the threshold, to be completely honest with you, now that I'm running it through my brain. But I would have and try to have a longer session over 90 minutes that's dedicated strictly to aerobic, and then pick the other 2 sessions to have some variety from threshold and VO2 max.
Yeah. No, I like that. And I think something too that really helped me, and this is more along the lines of running, was just trying to get 10,000 steps in a day. And that was independent of the running that I was actually doing. So if you only have 4 hours to train, try to accumulate more walking and just more movement in general. It's not going to magically make your fat max go up or your VO2 max go up or anything like that, but it will give you kind of like musculoskeletal adaptations that will then make you more resilient as an athlete as well.
Well, if that's what you're looking at too, if you have the capability of adding a standing desk or work standing for a period of time, that's also going to help you. You can also march in place. These are things that can still be taken advantage of. And I think, there are some of those like cycles under the desk that you can put. And I mean, you can always multitask if you want to really try to move the needle. And it's not 4 hours of structured training, but it's going to move you up to 9, 10, 11 hours, which you're going to feel better about yourself. You're probably going to have a little bit more calorie burn, and you're going to have a little bit more energy through the course of the day.
Yeah, that's no, I like that, because I do have a lot of individuals who come to me and they're like, I only have, a short amount of time to actually train. And so those are things I'm always thinking about. It's like, what are we going to implement? What's going to move the needle the most? And most of the time, what's going to move the needle the most are those higher intensity workouts. But you need to balance those high intensity workouts with lower intensity things like the aerobic development, like Aaron was saying, the walking, or the less sedentary behavior, like I was saying, because even though, it's like if you're walking, you're going to be at a pretty low percentage of your VO2 max, but that's still accumulating volume. So it's not going to move the needle quite as much as like an aerobic session on the bike is, but it's still going to move the needle more than if you're sitting at your desk all day. And if you are just training for 4 hours and then the rest of the time in your life you are sedentary, you're still going to get benefits from the training, but you are not going to be optimizing that training. So there's ways outside of that quote unquote training to still gain volume. That's kind of my point.
And reality, that's what it is.
Yep. All right. I'm going to stop us there, because I think that was a fun little question to end.
Oh, you have one more?
Okay, we got one more. Aaron's got time for it. So the new popular training method, right, is the Norwegian training method. And with that Norwegian training method, I know it's kind of a little bit steeped in mystery and stuff, but one of the big things is double threshold training days, right? So this question is, should you do zone 2 training longer, or should you do double threshold training days? What are the differences and what are the similarities between the two? In my opinion, they are totally different. One of them is kind of like high intensity, high intensity interval training that is controlled by the amount of lactate you're accumulating in your blood. And this is typically used for, I think the Ingebrigtsen brothers were the ones that kind of push this into mainstream popularity. And what they do is they do in the morning, they do a threshold training session where they don't go above a certain millimolar of lactate, and my opinions on that. But it's a little bit lower intensity, and then they come back later in the day. They do a little bit more of a higher intensity training session after that. So, in my opinion, what they're trying to do is they're trying to accumulate more intensity and more volume of intensity by looking at what their internal physiological variables are telling them, and in this case, it's lactate. So that's threshold training through and through. That's interval training through and through, right? Zone 2 training and doing that longer is going to facilitate increasing your volume, but just at lower intensities. And we talk about this a lot, is that zone 2 is really important for increasing your volume and not increasing the levels of fatigue that you're actually accumulating. Yes, you're still going to accumulate fatigue, but one of the reasons why the very high level endurance athletes can do so much volume is because a lot of it is done at lower intensities. You simply can't, your body just does not have the amount of resources unless you're supplementing with things that would be considered illegal, in terms of training. You don't have those resources to recover from those high intensity days over and over and over and over again. So you have to do the zone 2 stuff to increase your volume, and you do the high intensity stuff to increase, to kind of use that as like a sledgehammer for stress for very large adaptations. So that would be my opinion on it. I think you have to increase both. I definitely don't recommend double threshold training days to a lot of people, if anybody, unless they hit a kind of a prerequisite in terms of the amount of intensity that they're doing. But yeah, Aaron, what's your take on this one?
Who are you and what are you trying to accomplish?
Every single question, that's what it comes down to, right?
I mean, and one, the Norwegian method, it's been on the board for a while. It's just they've made it more public. But I come back to the question of what are you trying to accomplish? Where are you at in your journey? What have you been doing? What are you doing? It might not be right for you. And in this question, it's a great question, but I can't answer it because I don't know who's asking the question. And my answer for myself might be different than what I would answer for you, Phil, or it might be different between 20 of my athletes and one person that is not one of my athletes. It could be completely different. So I don't throw a stress at your body that it can't handle. And also recognize that these double threshold days are block periodization, and they only typically last 3, maybe 4 weeks. And that's it. You do not push it past that point. So you got to do it with knowledge. And the other thing about it is, if you're not prepared for this style from an aerobic standpoint, you're going to maybe get 1 week in. Oh, yeah, that felt great. You're going to explode week 2, and you're not going to be there for week 3. So it depends on where you're at in your journey. You have to go about this properly, and you have to go at it like strategically and surgically, because if you do it too long, you're going to end up probably creating other issues out there, from metabolic syndromes to muscle breakdown to stagnation or actual decreased or defunction. It's something that routinely I mean, let's just be honest. The individuals that are being exposed to this training, one, have a professional physiologist or team physiologist around them or prescribing these workouts and taking a lot of other things measurably into account.
Mm-hmm.
With that, they're being extremely smart about the process and guided through the process. So if you do not have the knowledge behind this, for all means, don't waste. I mean, don't do it because you're just going down a bad direction.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you do know what you're doing, you got to have some guardrails and you got to have some direction in place because the reality is you do this the wrong way, you're going to cause some negative responses when you're trying to cause positive. So for most individuals, to answer this question and keep it simple, do the aerobic stuff. Just follow the aerobic stuff. Yeah. Don't get down the rabbit hole of doing double threshold session days. I could go down a million different things, and probably not a million, but I could go down 100 of questions that are going to follow up. What is your job? How is your recovery? How's your nutrition? How's your hydration? Are you in a hot climate? Are you in a humid climate? Are you in a dry climate? All of these things are going to continue to roll off my brain as questions as, is this the right training from you? And just to choose to do it, it legitimately takes all of these questions and answering those questions to design the right protocol for that dual threshold training to get you to where you actually feel, or to get a response that you're looking to do it for. Because it is a high cost from a energy source and I mean, just from a mechanical source as well. So, I mean, the muscles are going to take a toll. So having those answers before you actually go down that path instead of saying, you know what, sounds like a good idea, let's go do it.
And I also want to remind everybody too that, you know, these individuals who are professionals, they're already running hundreds of miles a week. And, you know, so even if they're, you know, following 80-20, 90-10 polarization, other things like that, like they're running so many miles that their bodies, like the double threshold days are just a continuation of them getting enough volume within their higher intensity because they have built up to that for so long. So you have to take that into account. And then you also have to take into account exactly what Aaron was saying, is that most of the time we don't look at the larger context of what's actually going on. These sort of double threshold training days are not repeated every single week for the entire season. It's 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, when they're trying to sharpen up and get more volume as they get ready for, say, a 1,500 meter final or a 3K, you know, a 3,000 meter final or something along those lines.
Or a sprinter Olympic distance triathlon.
Yeah, exactly. So also these double threshold training days are specific to individuals who are running a little bit shorter of distances as well. So it's also that context that's happening. So there's a lot of there's a lot of things that go into it. For the most part, I think a lot of us would benefit from more volume by increasing our zone 2 training, because a lot of us just simply don't do it enough. And it is a good way of increasing your volume. Volume is connected to directly to endurance performance. Endurance performances, there's studies out there that's like, yeah, one of the biggest predictors of endurance performance potential is how much volume you do. So increasing your volume or doing double lactate threshold days, increase your volume. I think that's what it comes down to. So, Aaron, do you have anything else to say on that topic?
Like I started out by saying, who are you and what are you trying to accomplish? I mean, that's really, I mean, let's be honest. The most people that are the athletes that are doing that are shooting for Olympics or national competitions. And again, like I said, they traditionally have a team around them. So smart aerobic. It's gonna you're gonna enjoy the process a lot more too.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Awesome. Well, we will stop it there. Thanks everybody for all the great questions and all of that sort of stuff. If you do have any other questions about whether, like what questions to ask somebody for physiological testing, just any physiology or training questions, reach out to me on Instagram, critical02. Reach out to Aaron, try A Geiser. We'd be more than happy to entertain your questions, maybe answer them on the show. Yeah, I think that's all we got for now. Aaron, you want to leave him with anything?
I mean, we made it to season 2. I got invited back. It's a good day.
Heck yeah. Yep, it's always a good day when you can listen to the Critical Oxygen podcast. Don't forget, if you guys are enjoying this, if you did get to an hour and 10 minutes into this episode, please go over to Spotify, leave us a 5-star review, or give us DM me with any feedback that you have, because I'd love to look at that and then try to make the show even better. So with that, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.